Good evening and welcome to you all on yet another wonderful evening and day in lockdown. Thank you for joining us. My name is Patricia Lamore and I'm the CEO of Aspire Education Group. We are a UK-based hub of international consultants and independent learning providers, and we think and we act locally and globally. It is really an honor, and I'm excited to be hosting my first live stream here this evening with such a wonderful array of guests. And I'm glad you're here with us as well, because you are here because, like us, you're concerned about the impact post-lockdown, the educational impact on Black children and vulnerable learners up and down the country. This is a passion that's very close to my heart. I've been in education for 30 odd years, and I've taught in this country, in the Gambia, in Uganda, in Germany, and across Europe. So I taught from nursery to university, and so you can say that education is in my blood, inside out. And I'm joined this evening by some key special guests who you'll be seeing very soon. We have Diane Abbott MP, who's well known to everybody here, the first elected woman MP in this country, the first woman Black MP in this country, and who was re-elected with a landslide majority at the last election. We have also with us His Excellency Seth George Ramakan, the High Commissioner to Jamaica, and he'll be speaking about why he is concerned about the post-lockdown education impact on Black children here in this country. We also have a very special guest whose name is Mega Nalutaya, all the way from Uganda. She's a very special lady working with thousands of children from Uganda in the lockdown situation. And it was an honor for me to have her as my chair of EduTech conference we recently co-organized in Kampala, Uganda last year. So, and also through the rest of the program, we'll be joined by experts and specialists from up and down the country, from Birmingham, from Manchester, as well as London. And towards the end of our 90 minutes together, there will be a chance for you to contribute. We'll be looking out for questions or comments that you want to raise and be spoken about by the panelists. But one of the most key important things that why we're here today is because we want to kickstart a process that gives voice to Black parents, Black educators, Black support workers, grandparents who are so concerned about any gains that may have been made before for their children, before the lockdown, may be lost post-lockdown. So we have to redouble our efforts. And so we will be launching a national survey, which will go live from Friday the 29th, into which you can all put your views, and we will collate those views and put it together as a report, together with the outcomes of this discussion, and put this to the social policy makers, the school leaders, and of course you, the parents and the community, as soon as that's done before September hits. So without more ado, I'd like to start and welcome Diane Abbott, and welcome His Excellency Seth George Ramakan, and also to welcome Mega Nalutaya. So, welcome, Diane. So, you've each got 5 to 10 minutes to actually talk about the situation, the post-lockdown education situation, particularly of Black children and vulnerable learners, what it looks like to you, your particular perspective. This is just a conversation, to engage our listeners at home. We're not trying to, blind them with stats, but we know that the situation, the old normal wasn't good. So we need to make the new normal much better. So let's start off with you, please. Could we start off with our special guest, Seth George Ramakan?
Of course. Thank you so much, Patricia. I'm very, very pleased to be here to participate in this your first launch of this survey, which I think is so very important, very critical. And so I'd like to congratulate Aspire Education Group for arranging this forum, and of course to recognize the significant number of dignitaries and experts you have assembled here to share their expertise and their wisdom as we seek to address the very important issue of a post-lockdown impact on Black children and of course vulnerable children on a whole, here in the or community. Without a doubt, COVID-19 is forecasted to land us in a deep and long-lasting impact on the quality of life on a whole. And this is really peoples across the world. So this is something we are facing that is a global issue. It's this view that really caused Jamaica at the time when we first learned of the COVID-19 to really, and not only Jamaica, but the rest of the Caribbean, particularly the English-speaking Caribbean, because we have the CARICOM group there, to really earnestly seek to contain and to manage this virus in a manner that it would have minimal impact on the countries and, of course, upon the lives of people as a consequence. And in Jamaica, under the leadership of our Prime Minister Andrew Holness, we locked down very early. We ran an intensive public awareness, public education campaign, so that people would understand what this is, what it's all about. This was followed by, the stay-at-home policy, followed by, of course, the testing and the tracing and sanitizing and the curfewing and, just the regular reporting that the government does in order to keep the nation up to date. So people were current. They understood what was happening. They were following. They were understanding, their role and what they needed to do in order to impact and to have a positive outcome. And thankfully, I must say, the end result is that, 9 deaths over the period, and of course, a high recovery rate as we speak. In fact, in terms of new infections, there were 2 days over the past 2 weeks where there was 0 infection. And on most other days, there were 2 or somewhere thereabout. So we were not having spiraling amount. Of course, we are having the return of a number of our nationals from overseas who work in the shipping industry and so on. And they have come, in large numbers, and testing is being done in order to determine if they are COVID-free. And of course, there's a whole quarantine policy and all that. So that really is, one of the good news, if I may say, that in the Caribbean, across the 22 countries, there is less than 100, infections, deaths rather. We have very, very little number of persons who have died in the region. When you think about the sort of extremity that this thing has gone to in some other locations across the world. Now, without a doubt, here in Britain, many children in the Caribbean community have flourished and they have excelled in school, high achievers. They hold high positions in society, and therefore, through the school system, this has been achieved. However, studies upon studies and statistics upon statistics have shown the lack of, positive educational outcomes for a majority of our children. And this is very sad because we are talking about the descendants of the Windrush generation who helped to rebuild this country and to really, they endured many hardships and discriminations and hoping for, their dream to be fulfilled for a better road for their children, that they would have been able to attain this. And so it's very important as we look at the situation that that is facing us, the COVID environment, the post-COVID environment, that there is the forecast is that there is going to be a significant downturn in the economies across the world. And naturally, this is going to have a significant impact upon every aspect of life, including education. And so there's an urgent need for improving the quality of education for children, and particularly for children, within the BAME community, where pupil achievement persistently has lagged behind, over many years. So everything must be done to ensure that those children who are already left behind are not left further behind. And so I welcome this survey, that you will get some very positive results to make some changes for the community.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency George Seth Ramakan. And of course, greetings and welcome to Dr. Lola Ramakan there, who was sitting with him herself. She's a former educational inspector from Jamaica. So we see that in Jamaica, they've contained the deaths early and locked down early. I'd like to quickly move on now, because we have a lot of people that we want our viewers at home to hear and listen to. So I'd like to move without any ado to Right Honourable Diane Abbott, a long-standing friend and colleague. If I could turn over to you now, please, Diane.
Thank you, Pat. I'm really pleased to take part in this session this evening, because the education of our children and what happens to our children in the school system is a long-standing passion of mine.
Yeah.
And I just want to say a few sentences of what it was like 20-odd years ago when you and I started campaigning on this issue, what attitudes were like. All sorts of progressive teachers would insist it wasn't about race at all, it was about class. All sorts of progressive teachers would say, are you trying to say I'm racist? You couldn't raise what was happening to our children without being challenged. And it took huge effort by campaigners, many of whom I imagine will be with us this evening, to actually move the debate forward and try to get some improvements. But the truth was that figures don't lie. And although some Black and minority children have always done well, there was a huge achievement gap, particularly for boys, particularly when these children moved on to secondary school. You also had a problem which ran alongside the achievement gap, and that was exclusions. And there's a man called Martineri, who was Director General of the Prison Service and went on to run Barnardo's, who said, on the day you exclude a child from school, you might as well give them a date and time to turn up at prison. And one of the problems we have in talking about what's happening to our young people, particularly our young men, is sometimes politicians and educationalists don't understand that a lot of these issues are rooted in the achievement gap. So I'm very concerned that post-COVID, whatever progress we've made in improving our children's achievement is going to slip back. And there's a number of reasons for that. One is some schools, some primary schools will be going back next week. but there'll be children that don't go back before the beginning of the autumn term. And these children will have lost 6 months schooling. Our children can't afford to lose 6 months schooling, not unless something is put in place to help them and support them. And I've not heard enough about that. The other problem is that ordinary children, working class children, perhaps living on council estates, don't necessarily have access to the kind of online resources. There may not be the space, there may not be the broadband, there may not be the access. So whereas privately educated children and better off families have been able to access regular online learning, ordinary children have not done, and that's another problem. There's the gap in their education. There's the difficulties in accessing online resources. And also, the problem with the gap in their education is not just that they won't have done these times tables or read that book or learnt those scientific tables. It's that they've lost the order and they've lost the structure that the school day gave them. So I'm very concerned. This and all of the stress on the Black family because of COVID, because we all know about the disproportionate number of deaths that's happening to us. So I think we really have to think hard about how we're going to support our children, how we're going to make sure they don't slip back post-COVID. The other issue that's going to arise post-COVID is I have absolutely no doubt at all that this government will reintroduce austerity, they'll reintroduce cuts for youth groups, for projects, even in schools themselves. And also, we're going to see a rise in joblessness, which won't affect the children at first directly, but will certainly affect their families. So what I'm saying, it's been a long, hard battle to get the education establishment to take the education of our children seriously and to understand about institutional racism in education. And I wouldn't say we've been 100% successful. We don't want to lose the ground that we've made. And I'm really glad that Pat has organised this event tonight so we can talk about this.
Thank you so much, Diane. Thank you. Yes, she's absolutely right. We've been working really hard. 20, 30 years ago, London Schools and the Black Child was going for 10 years. And now we've moved from the whole issue of institutionalized racism to unconscious bias. It's now the latest buzzword. But as you say, the figures do not lie. Exclusions are currently around 400,000 a year, fixed and permanent exclusions of the whole population. And the actual disproportionality for Black children is staggering, absolutely staggering, 3 to 4 times, and in certain localities much higher. So we're back on track in terms of time. I'd like to say to our viewers, apologies from Councillor Antoinette Bramble. She's had to urgently meet some young people during the manifesto time and during the lockdown time, and there was a clash here, but she's very much supportive of what we're doing, and particularly as the deputy mayor of a borough, Hackney, one of the few, if only boroughs in the country to adopt a 10-year strategy to improve the outcomes of young Black men and Black boys, particularly because of the dire statistics in education, in mental health, in joblessness, etc., as the young people progress up the system. But however, it is my pleasure to introduce and welcome our international guest. Her name is Mega Nalutaya. She is the founder of Soar Away in Uganda, and she's working with, through her delivery partners and community partners, thousands of children across Uganda during this lockdown period. And I just so that we could have some international comparison of how it is for you, youth charity and organisation, faring with COVID lockdown and what it's like for vulnerable learners in Uganda during this time. Over to you, Mega.
Thank you so much, Patricia. And I am so honored to join in this discussion today. It's been a pleasure to hear and compare notes with what is happening in the UK. To give you a little background about Uganda, I think most people know that Uganda is one of the youngest populations on earth, and we have 78% of our population being below the age of 35, and we have 54% of our population being below the age of 18. Therefore, for us, developing our young people is a very high priority. So that's why I started So Away, an organization that is focused on making sure that every young person in Uganda has the opportunity to maximize their potential, as well as lead when it comes to leading the change that Uganda needs for the future. So our commitment and work in reducing education inequality and ensuring better outcomes for all is not new. However, as you know, the disproportionate effect, the way has disproportionately affected our young people, especially in rural Uganda, who are 80% of the population, has led us to step up our work. Most young people in Uganda, 80%, are in rural areas, and they do not have access to the internet. They do not have access to computers, to televisions or newspapers, which is the means through which the government is providing for education during the lockdown. Uganda has been on lockdown for more than 2 months now. And this has led to a lot of fallback with our students, because most of them are first generation learners, and therefore they do not have the privilege of parents who can help them to learn. And most of the parents don't even support education because they've been let down with the high unemployment rates in Uganda. We have an 82% youth unemployment rate. Um, Most of them have to contribute to household incomes, and so they spend almost all day in the garden or hawking foodstuffs to be able to contribute to the household income. The boys are being quickly absorbed back into manual labor. As you can imagine, a rural student staying at home for almost 3 months. And the girls, we've had very sad reports of many of them getting married, or getting pregnant, and using sex for survival. Many poor households cannot provide for their sanitary needs and the other needs that a girl child has. So our organization has had to really step up in order to support this. And one of the things that we are doing during COVID lockdown is peer mentors. We have a good network of peer mentors who are important in mobilizing and motivating our students to keep reading, and to also uh, give out the print reading materials that we have made available through our organization. This, we believe, will also be critical in making sure that girls return back to school, since their fellows will be able to mobilize them. We have also been forced to give out foodstuffs, soap, and menstrual hygiene products because it's difficult to tell a child who is hungry or who does not have what to use, the basics to use to keep studying and to keep motivated with their education. So we've been forced to take that path and support them as much as we can. Previously, for the last 2 years, our organization has been organizing academic seminars where we bring academic examiners and excellent teachers from the well-to-do schools to rural areas in rural Uganda, because we work with 108 schools in rural Uganda, and these teachers provide a long weekend seminar where students who are graduating or preparing for their national exams gather, and they are given tips, they are given question approach, they are given confidence and everything that they need to prepare for their national exams. Because in Uganda, students sit the same national exam, which dictates which course they can do or which uh, institution of higher learning they can attend, which is very unfair for the students who go to the poor schools. So we've been doing this. We've so far provided this service to more than 20,000 students, which has made a big difference, because now you can imagine what it feels like if you're a rural student who barely has a teacher, and you get access to one of the national examiners who is going to set and mark the exam that you're going to sit. So that has been helpful, and we look forward to doing more of that in the coming months. Luckily, the students preparing for national exams will be heading back to school next week, so we look forward to providing that for them. Also, through our school outreaches, we look forward to continuing what we always do, which is adding the character development, leadership, and creativity to the normal school curriculum. because even with COVID, when schools open up, every emphasis is going to be on national exams and helping students to just catch up with their learning, forgetting that education and the outcomes for education should be way beyond just passing exams. So we look forward to continuing to offer this addition to make sure that our students grow up to be all-rounded citizens that are responsible and have what it takes to drive the transformation that Uganda needs. Thank you so much for being here tonight, and I look forward to learning more from what you're doing in the UK.
Thank you so much, Mega, for giving us that that overview and really showing us that in a rural situation, the impact of not going to school means working on the farms morning, noon, and night. It means girls not only missing out on education, but becoming forced into early marriage, forced child brides, or as you said, selling sex for survival. And, you know, it's just really good to be reminded of how, even though we complain of how our situation is comparably much better, but what I really found really interesting was that example that you gave of top national educators going out and doing weekend schools in the rural communities to make sure that children had an extra booster class really to help them with their exams. And that was just fabulous. So thank you very much. So we've heard so far from His Excellency George Seth Ramakan, Jamaican High Commissioner, about the Windrush descendants wanting so much more for their children. Some have achieved, but statistics are showing that it's really not up to standard yet, and there's far more to be achieved. We've heard from Diane Abbott, who's been a long-standing campaigner about the achievement, or rather correcting the underachievement of Black children in particular, and the fact that we're really concerned, she hasn't heard from this government yet, of things that we put in place to make sure that the few gains that we have made in terms of narrowing the achievement gap, particularly for children, Black children, as well as poorer children, that how that is actually going to continue post-COVID lockdown. And that is so key. And lastly, we've heard from Mega Nalatuya from Uganda, Soraway, Uganda, doing fantastic outreach work, forcing now actually, given the impact of COVID, to also find food for children in Uganda. So to the rest of the viewers who've just joined us, welcome. This is Aspire Education Group, our roundtable launching our national survey for Black parents, carers and educators and support workers in the profession, how we are going to inform the new normal post-lockdown. So I'd like to say thank you to our initial special guests as we now bring on our next group of roundtable experts. I do hope you'll be able to stay with us, our special guests, as we'll have some questions later on in the evening from our Facebook and YouTube viewers. So I'd now like to introduce our next group of experts coming on board. We have Amani Simpson of Aviard Inspires. His short autobiographical film amassed, I can't remember how many million of views in just 4 days. And he's someone who inspires young people up and down the country and is currently collecting views on what's happening with young people during this lockdown period. We'll also be introducing to you to Dr. Ornette Clennon, who is from Manchester. He's representing MEEP, Make Education a Priority, and he'll talk to you about his virtual academy and also his work, which has been informed by critical race theory. He's also an academic. We also have Dr. Paulette Osborne, who is a school leader improvement consultant, and she is coming from Birmingham, So we have representation from Birmingham and Manchester. And last but not least, we have Gregory Logan, who is a head teacher, one of our few, very, very few Black male head teachers in this country. And he's the head teacher for Daubeny Primary School in Hackney. So let's start by welcoming Amani. Oh, it's such a clear, you can see you're used to these things. It's so clear, your thing. And Paulette, so if we could start, and also Ornette, welcome there.
Hey guys.
So if we could kick off, please, with you, Amani. Yeah,
okay.
Welcome, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, everyone. So my name is Amani Simpson. I am a youth coach. I am a social entrepreneur, and I'm a filmmaker. So the perspective I'm going to come from today is what are young people saying during this lockdown period. And it's quite timely. I've just started a campaign called #OurLockdown, and it's all about trying to amplify the voices of young people. So I'll tell you a bit more about my story, and then I thought rather than me just waffle on, it would be good to get some young people to speak about their experience. So I've got a little video to play for you if it's ready to play in a second. So when I was 21 years old, I was stabbed 7 times, intervening in someone else's argument. I wasn't from a bad home. I grew up in a 2-parent home in North London. My parents were, I guess, descendants of just probably the pre-Windrush generation. And they loved me to the best of their ability, but that didn't necessarily prepare me for the school system. And I was bullied, and it kind of led me down a path of compounding bad choices. So now I live my life to help steer young people away from those choices and those feelings. And everything I do is about trying to empower young people to, reach their full potential and to feel good about themselves. So one of the reasons I started this campaign is because I kept hearing in the news a lot of negative things about young people leaving their house, young people not keeping up with this lockdown restriction. And I just said, that's not the young people that I know. There's a lot of young people that are amazing, that are trying to use this time, as much as there are, very tough situations, they're trying to use this time to grow and to develop. So I thought all I can do is all I can do. And I'm going to use my platform to really try and amplify their voices. So I think I should have the video ready, Theo, if we're good to go. It's only a 2-minute video. If not, I can walk through it. It's fine.
Where is he? Theo. Technology, huh?
Oh, man.
And you sent the video, I know. You sent it to him.
All right.
I've even seen it. It was brilliant.
Thank you.
It was lovely.
If it doesn't play, it doesn't play. We'll make it work.
Keep going.
That's fine. No problem.
Go on. Keep going, please.
Yeah. So one of the main reasons why I started the campaign, as I said, is to ask some questions. And one of the questions that we were asking is what makes you smile. One thing that made you smile during lockdown. Another question was one thing that you would do differently after lockdown. Another question was one thing that you'd want leaders to do after lockdown. And the whole idea behind the campaign is for young people to submit their videos and to basically share their perspective. Because for me, we can always focus on the negative, but there's always a glimmer of hope and positivity in all these situations. And I personally want young people to yes, be realistic, yes, be thinking about the unprecedented times that we're in, but also have hope for their future and what they're going to do when they come out of this. Some of the young people have mentioned that, they've really enjoyed spending time with their family. Some of their dads are working super hard in the city trying to provide for them. And now is the only time that they've really been able to kind of sit down and play games, or they've got younger siblings that they just kind of walk past in the evening, and now they're able to get to know them. Another kind of standout point for me was one of the young ladies that featured in the video. She said to me, or she said to the video that, she was really hard on herself during her exams. She really felt like she wasn't going to do really well. And in reflection now, kind of looking back, she's actually seen that her results were really, really good. And this time has allowed her to reflect and actually say, okay, next time I go into exams, I'm going to believe in myself and believe I can do better. So, I'm here to just amplify the voices of young people, as I keep saying. Last year, I created a short film about my story, which was basically, my experience in the ambulance and, really reflecting on some of the mistakes that I made. And it was viewed 1 million times in 4 days predominantly by young people. It was shared, thank you, it was shared up and down the country. And, you know, for me, it's most definitely about trying to get more positive stories, because, you know, we have to control the narrative for the generation coming after us. We have to control our narrative. We're not just all gang members. We're not just all thugs. You know, there's a lot of brilliant minds in our community, and I'm just here to try and amplify, as I keep saying. So one of the things I was hoping to do is show the video, but if that doesn't work, that's fine.
It's not happening at the moment. I'm sorry, Amani.
No, that's fine. That's cool. That's all right. No problem. It's technology. It's all right. Theo, I'm sorry. I tried to save you, Theo. I'm sorry, man. I'm sorry, bro.
Okay.
But yeah, to wrap up, you know, you guys can, you know, get in touch with me. My name is Amani Simpson, Amani Simpson. I've got loads of different content online, loads of different things that I'm up to, but predominantly I'm here to just connect with those that are, you know, in front of young people that need me to come and empower their young people. And yeah, let's get together and do this as a community. Take care.
Right. Okay. So thank you. Ornette, if we could please move on to you, Manchester.
Yes. Hello.
Thank you.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Yes, I'm Ornette Clennon. I'm a director of Making Education a Priority. Now, this is an education enterprise that Diane Abbott was the midwife for all the way back in 2013 at a seminal conference at Manchester Metropolitan University. And Diane also kindly provided the foreword to our 2014 Palgrave book from the event, Alternative Education and Community Engagement, Making Education a Priority. So, hi, Diane. Good to see you again. So we are a consortium of African diaspora-led supplementary schools working in Greater Manchester. And I'm here tonight just to quickly talk about our virtual school, but more specifically, what online learning entails and what the new opportunities are. So one of the things that we're not really hearing about in the national coverage about schools and their online teaching is that the practice of online teaching is divided broadly into two distinct approaches. So there's the asynchronous teaching approach, where learning happens at different times in different places and at different paces. Our mainstream teachers are using this method of online delivery, but there's a huge problem with them taking this approach because it's a hugely specialized way of teaching that only some universities deliver, such as the Open University. So this form of teaching requires extremely detailed knowledge of software that will enable the teacher to monitor performance and engagement and attainment in the material that they set online. Basically, without working face-to-face, how do you monitor learners' interaction with your teaching materials? More importantly, how do you motivate and encourage them? So obviously all of this is possible, but it requires a certain maturity from the learner in terms of their self-motivation, as well as their expertise on the side of the practitioner in terms of setting up this online environment. Even universities struggle with this, which is why the OU, the Open University, is the leading university to do this. So my question is, why are school teachers doing this? This is all the more perplexing when they are already masters of synchronous teaching. So synchronous teaching is where everyone learns at the same time and at the same place, although still at different paces. And we've got online software that already allows teachers to construct face-to-face synchronous learning experiences, which, considering their professional background, is much easier to deliver. Also, this approach is far more suitable for younger primary and secondary school learners as they're used to face-to-face teaching. So, yes, of course, all teachers would need to take a little time to learn how to use the platform and adapt some of their teaching materials to this new medium. Of course we do, because in our organisation, we delivered staff training to do just that. But this is nowhere as hard as learning how to deliver asynchronous teaching from scratch. All of the infrastructural issues around internet access and access to devices apply to both approaches. So, as Black parents and educators, we need to build a national online infrastructure of synchronous providers who can offer alternatives to what is currently on offer in the mainstream, especially when physically sending our children back to school might not be entirely safe for us, considering our higher infection rate. So We need to use this new infrastructure to ensure that our children do not fall behind in their studies, but perhaps, and even more importantly, we need to use this crisis as an opportunity to take back control, sound familiar, of our children's education in terms of using our cultural heritages as educational assets. So we seem to be at the dawn of a rebooted supplementary school movement for the 21st century. So let's take advantage of our new connectedness. Let's consolidate our past supplementary school work in order to build our own mainstream education models, which might include a blended mix of online and physical learning. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the time. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much, Ornette. And for those who've just joined us, that was Ornette Clennon speaking about seizing the opportunity to build infrastructure of blended learning. In fact, it could even be a rebuilding of supplementary school 2.0, so to speak.
Yeah.
Which actually is meeting the needs, also the culturally relevant needs of our children as well. I'd just like to remind people before I bring Paulette in that the whole purpose of this roundtable is also to kickstart our national survey, which will be going live on Friday. The information will be up on our website, www.aspireeducationgroup.com, and also we'll be giving the links, the survey links, to all the people who've joined us on the survey, on the roundtable here today, so that they can spread it through their networks. And we have a group of millennial techies who are also working to make sure that this survey pings out, and that's been led by Ethel Tambudsai, who's been, just a shout out to Ethel, who's been behind the scenes and contacting all the roundtable. So that's to let you know. And I'll say it again, but first of all, let's bring on board, please, Dr. Paulette Osborne. Welcome from Birmingham. What do you see? How do school leaders need to improve post-lockdown? Thank you.
Thank you. And it's a real honour to be here, Patricia, this evening. So thank you very much for inviting me. Schools will never be able to deliver their core purpose until education is no longer a pawn for our political parties. The government has decided it's now economically important for everyone to do the things that result in taxes being paid and for people not to be paid 80% of their salary to sit on a beach anymore. Schools are currently being faced with insurmountable pressures. Logistical challenges take up every waking moment for school leaders. It's really, really difficult for them to actually release themselves from the burden of the paperwork at the moment during COVID, to really, really look at and assess the quality of the learning that they're providing. And I know certainly in Birmingham, schools, they've had risk assessments to complete, 25 pages of a template. So you can imagine once that's completed, the level of work and effort and anxiety that really school leaders are facing. And schools can't compensate for society. We really need to address the wider socio-economic issues that permeate into the classroom. And we need to address the intellectual arrogance that says parents who are less affluent are unable to support their own children, and acknowledge that disadvantage doesn't mean disillusioned or disengagement. In the short term, at least, parents have a choice as to whether or not they send their children back to nursery, reception, year 1, year 6, years 10 and 12. And they've got that, they can make that decision and begin to shape and begin to think about what home learning can actually look like for them. Personally, I wouldn't send any child of mine back to a school on the 1st of June, maybe on the 8th or the 15th, but again, something for parents to consider. And if schools know they have children at home, then there is really now a clear obligation to review and strengthen what they provide in the name of home learning. Lockdown was swift and very sudden, and there was no time to properly communicate with parents and with children to a degree. no time to talk about what a daily routine might look like, the need to really chunk the learning and not to try and sort of emulate or replicate those hour blocks that we traditionally see in schools. So really, really key that we look to the home learning and begin to think about what exactly should that be looking like, because we are due to perhaps go through this again, and we want to make it better at home for the students going forward. So I mean, the DFE released some great learning materials, and again, communicating that to parents and children has been really, really difficult for schools. For me, the best way to support any child is, of course, a good teacher in front of the class, in front of a group of students. But I think teachers really, really need to get to grips with the teaching and the learning around metacognition and self-regulation, because this supports both home learning and school learning. And metacognition and self-regulation is about pupils knowing their strengths and their weaknesses, knowing how to improve these. It's about children understanding about motivation so they can independently plan and monitor and evaluate their own learning, developing their knowledge of themselves as learners, and developing those strategies where they can tackle any task, anywhere and at any time. And it's a real powerful way of improving pupil outcomes. This would really set children up for good home learning, but also good school learning and in any subject. The next wave, the next pandemic, it just wouldn't be as detrimental if we can really get to grips with teaching our students how to learn, so that they can really undertake challenging activities and not be sent home with low-level types of work to try and move their learning forward. I think it was Frederick Douglass who said, once you learn to read, you will be forever free. And for me, a key thing that schools can do is to build a reading culture. 1 in 8 children don't have a single book in the home. And that's not necessarily because they can't afford books. PlayStations, other items are clearly within the homes, but it's about the choice not to read, the choice that parents are not realizing the importance of. And for schools, the key job is to develop that reading for pleasure. And it's a real indicator for academic success is reading. 25% of our 15-year-olds have a reading age of 12 and below. And hours of GCSE reading requires a lot of children to read, and the struggle that they're facing just really, really hampers their success going forwards. And it's quite ironic when, every day we see people being interviewed around COVID, and what's at the back of them? Bookshelves. You see it all the time. It's quite funny. But of course, these people, it's a real testimony. These people know the value of the book and the reading and the education. And these are simple things that can happen and certainly move forward within the school setting, but also in terms of home learning as well. So schools need to really teach and model and scaffold pupils, especially around their reading. And the previous speaker talked about motivation, and I'm a real big fan about motivation, because this is what we need going forwards. And this will really help children then to be able to move forward and be strategic learners, strategic readers, and to really move forward in terms of education, because times have shown us it's not always going to be within the school setting. Time has shown us the school setting doesn't really work for a lot of us. Yeah. So actually, there's other ways of drawing this together and shaping it for the future.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Paula, and thank you for raising those points. Again, just for people who've joined us, we are live here launching our national survey to actually give a voice. What people perhaps haven't alluded to, that before the lockdown, the trust and communication between schools and parents were not high, particularly within our community. They're at an all-time low. And that has also underpinned the disengagement of many of the children from the school. So therefore, the importance of this survey to make sure that parents, teachers, support workers, the glue that are inside the schools that nobody usually talks about, they don't usually have a progression route. They're the ones who are the hands-on to enable some of the teachers to actually do the work of the academic learning. They're dealing with the behavioural needs, the special needs, the parent engagement. That work isn't sufficiently acknowledged, and that also is the glue, the trust and the communication that needs to be built. So hence the importance of this survey. And just to let you know, there's a running across the bottom that if you want to know more about it, please contact info@aspireeducationgroup.com. But thank you very much, Paulette. I see we've lost Gregory Logan. It would be great, before I bring in Judith, if Gregory Logan is still there. He was very much earlier as a head teacher. Hi. I'd like to turn it over to you, because we've heard from someone who's doing a virtual academy. We've heard from someone who's improving schools. I'd like to talk to you as someone, as I said, one of the very, very few Black teachers, let alone Black male head teachers in the country. The actual proportion of head teachers from a Black background is dismal. It's absolutely negligent, given the number of our children in schools. So I'd really like to turn over to you, Gregory, and to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. And I'd like to start off by saying good evening, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to work with you. Roughly 1 year on since we worked together originally on a project called It Takes a Village. And I'm positive many of you will be familiar with that saying. And if we know it in its entirety, it says, it takes a village to raise a child where parents are lacking. And I say that because a lot of what I will speak about in the next 5 minutes pertains to that, because I'd like to start off by saying, as Mr. Ramajan said right at the very beginning, there are many, many young people, many young families who are doing very well despite all of the obstacles that are in their way. And I see that this platform allows me to share my opinion that actually, yes, we celebrate those families, but what do we do for those families who might aspire for their children, but for whatever reason, they cannot provide the skills and resources? So when Patricia asked me to speak today, it was around how primary schools can engage Black children and vulnerable children post-lockdown. And for me, it's interesting because I think at the present time of speaking, nobody knows what post-lockdown will really look like. However, I think there are some things that are going to be integral to how we move forward, no matter what the landscape looks like. And as the previous speaker, Dr. Paulette Osborne said, I think quality first teachers is something that we must not estimate. We take for granted. And quality first teachers who have great subject knowledge of the traditional subjects as we expect in numeracy, literacy, geography, etc., that should be taken as a given to inspire our children. Many of us of the first generation or the second generation of Windrush were inspired by teachers who maybe didn't look like us, but they had great subject knowledge and they were inspirational and they inspired us in some shape or form. But now in this 21st century, despite all the efforts that have been going on for almost a generation now, we've heard about programs that the Right Honourable Diane Abbott's been part of for 20 years or so, that now we need to shift our focus away from just academics. We need to develop teacher skills around emotional intelligence. We need to develop their knowledge around attachment issues. We heard earlier on, again, from Dr. Osborne regarding self-regulation. There's also, I'll be a next speaker coming up shortly, Courtney Brown, a colleague of mine. We go around the borough of Hackney and beyond the borders talking about unconscious bias. Our teachers need to become aware of unconscious bias in their practice. They need to become aware of racial identity theory. They need to become aware of post-traumatic slave syndrome and other theories that have an impact directly on so-called BAMI populations, but also on disadvantaged individuals. We would like, especially in a primary setting where my problems are slightly different to those in secondary settings, we'd love our teachers to develop a knowledge of Black literature, As a head teacher, I'd also like to see the CLPE, the Centre for Literacy in Primary Education, maybe do a big drive around Black literature for primary education, linking into books and the power of reading and the desire of reading and the reading for pleasure. We might come back to later on. Also, we want and we would love teachers to develop their knowledge of African history. However, I'll come back to that as well. Yes, we want an inclusive curriculum. However, I must say this, and I say this very carefully and very delicately as a head teacher in a state-maintained primary school. One must recognise that the state's education system provides a minimum standard, whether you go to an outstanding school, a good school, an RI school, or an inadequate school. It's a minimum standard. Yes, you have passionate head teachers who deliver great love, pastoral care for their children, but you are getting a minimum standard. I'm going to come back to why I emphasize that minimum standard. We also want to create a real focus for our BAMI students around STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Those are the world creators of the future. And we want our children not to just go to school to be educated to get jobs, but we want them to go to school, get an education, and become creators of jobs, creators of wealth.
Excellent, excellent.
And that's something I personally want to see. So very quickly, I want to go back to Amani's point very quickly in terms of, I think it's very important that we who have some influence really try our very best to celebrate the achievements of our young African and African Caribbean pupils. I think the media, whether you think it's a conscious or an unconscious thing, far too quick to push out those negative stereotypes, arguably propaganda that we see on an ongoing basis for years, decades.
You know, I'm going to have to soon cut you soon because I could listen to you the whole night. But unfortunately, we've got others working in the wings.
Give me 30 seconds, please, just to join these two things.
Okay, Greg, 30 seconds.
30 seconds. So I talked about a standard, the minimum standard of education. For those who are outside of our community, their education is supplemented either at home or via other supplementary schools and social networks. And that's where we've got to push our supplementary schools, as young Dr. Ornette mentioned as well, and also mentoring age 8 all the way through to 18. Hopefully my brother Courtney Brown will expand on that when he gets his moment.
Thank you. Thank you, Gregory. Thank you so much. Thanks. So swiftly moving on, after Gregory, we've had Dr. Paulette. So I'd like to bring on board Courtney Brown, Judith Hughes, and Julian. And we do want to spend some time for taking up questions from the Facebook viewers. So if there's anybody who wants some questions answered or particularly want to see some questions in our survey, because remember, this is about your voice. And so as a result of what we're hearing here, we're going to adapt the survey for our parents and carers, for our Black educators, so it really and truly reflects what their experience is and what they want to see post-education lockdown. Okay, so I'd like to now call on Courtney, who's been Courtney Brown from Father to Father. He's a mentor, and then we'll go on to Judith and then finish off with Juliet. Welcome.
Can you hear me all? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi. First of all, thank you, Aspire Prep, for inviting me to speak on this platform. I definitely welcome the national survey. I think it's a very important thing that you're doing, and I'm so glad that we can support you on this. Again, a lot of the previous speakers have covered a lot of things that I would have wanted to touch on. But I just want to speak about something, and I think this discussion is very, very important. Being a father of 4 boys myself, and being a father of 4 boys, but also a man that works in education, but actually witnessed a white male head teacher pinning down my 6-year-old son after a barrage of insults to me, my wife, our faith, and so forth. So this thing, when I'm listening to everybody talk, I can feel my heart hurting because it's bringing me back to that journey me and my wife and the family members went through dealing with an education system that I am actually part of. And as my brother Greg Logan talked about, we deliver unconscious bias, but there's also conscious bias. We deliver
That's right.
racial identity and trauma, post-traumatic slave syndrome, and all those things. And to see, and I'm a parent that is very involved in my child's education, but yet this head teacher, for whatever reason, didn't, well, let's put it, racism, didn't take it on board. I had to move my son out of that school after 8 weeks of sitting in that school, because I just said, no way the man's going to touch my son again. Until I finally went to the head of education for that borough and moved my son out of school. But what got me to realize is that if I'm going through that and, I've got the support around me, what about other parents? And that's why I say to everybody, my own pain, drives my profession as well. So that's why when I speak to schools, head teachers, I talk from a point of somebody that's experienced injustice in the system. And yeah, I was angry. Wouldn't you be angry if you saw a man pin down your son? But you know what? It's how do we now navigate the system to benefit our boys and support our parents as well, to be able to navigate that system as well. So that brings me on to something that we haven't touched on, which is contextual safeguarding. Contextual, which means that harm can take place not only in the home, which normal statutory organisations look at in the home, but it can take place in the school as well.
Exactly.
And harm can take place in the school as well. And I talk about that because since we've been on the lockdown, Father to Father has been, supporting parents in this lockdown by supporting parents to be able to support their children in this lockdown. And some of the things that I'm getting from parents, I'll just go through them. A respite from the barrage of phone calls about their children. So they're not so about their children's negative behavior. To sometimes parents have to before, but now they don't get that anymore. So there's different stresses, but it's not the school coming at them and making parents feel like they're making them feel like they're not worthy, like they're bad parents. What's also I've seen from working with parents also is that parents are now sorting culturally competent community organizations that benefit their children's understanding of their culture, but can deliver the obviously the education side as well. So the attainment gap isn't widening. So I think home learning is going to be a very big thing moving forward. As Greg said, Father to Father, we've developed mentors within the group. So I've got at the moment 15 mentors who have gone on racial identity and trauma training and seen a little bit about post-traumatic slave. And now we're supporting our young Black boys in the community by online mentoring with them at the moment. And obviously it's for those boys, they're seeing somebody who looks like them, but also for the men understand the pain that they're going through because those men have gone through it themselves. So they're able to now help our boys navigate some of the obstacles that they're going to come up against in this world, and so forth. So those are some. And I have to soon
cut you, Courtney, please.
So those are the things that we're picking up. Again, I think also we just have to talk about, the NHS. They've put something out around protecting BAME workers from workforce.
Right.
Why is not the education doing that?
Exactly. Thank you. We'll pick that up later. So I've got to go through to Judith and then Julian, please. Okay. Thank you very much. Judith, if we could have your experience, please, from Manchester, yeah?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Judith. Yeah. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you, Patricia, for giving me this opportunity to speak from a college perspective. So my background is I've been teaching in further education for over 19 years, and I wanted to speak about the effects on the young person that's studying at college, and also what can be done to improve their experience that they're going through now. So at the moment, we're currently experiencing challenging times, as adults, but never mind for the young person. And for most young people, the further education may be part of their educational process. So they completed school, moved on to college, and they're hoping to go on to university. But of course, everything in terms of their education has come to a kind of an abrupt halt. So looking at it from a young person's point of view, you know, they were engaged in education on the course, and now the routine has been changed, the structure to the lifestyle has changed, their interaction with their peers, you know, is non-existent, and then they've also got what's going on at home. So because of post-16 learners we're talking about, some of them might be working, employed, some of them might be the breadwinner. As educators or as teachers, we're asked to keep in contact with our learners, and sometimes it can be very difficult. So we're expecting that they have access to Wi-Fi, access to internet resources, because we're expecting them to continue with their education. Some of the learners say that the environment isn't the right environment for them to do their education, so they struggle. Before I start to engage with my learners, the first thing that I always ask them since COVID and before COVID, and I'm going to bring in here Ofsted and Every Child Matters, is, are you safe and are you well? That's what's important. Before I start to say, you know, are you up to date with what work, you know, has been given to you? So that's really, really important. And sometimes the answer might be no. And then before we can even go on to what that learner has to complete or where that learner is up to in terms of their education, you know, we have to speak about if the learner will want to speak to us about what is going on at home or what may be stopping them continuing their education. So it's, you know, it will be very, very difficult for them. But we have a certain responsibility as teachers and as tutors, because even though the education, you know, has stopped at the college, the education is expected to continue, and with great difficulty. So I currently I'm looking after 62 learners, and I'm expected to engage with these learners on a weekly basis, sometimes twice a week. Sometimes it's difficult, and whilst I'm, you know, asking them about completing tasks, researching, handing in work, what resources they have available at home, you know, I've got to consider that they might not even be in the right mindset for this. But what's quite important is that, you know, at this moment in time, and next week we're going to be looking at predicted grades. And what's got to be taken into consideration is the predicted grades is not just the work that was started from September to March, also the work that was covered between March and, you know, to date. So how is that fair? How can that be fair to the learners that don't have the resources, the learners that have numerous amounts of people living in the home that say to me that, you know, there's no space for us to continue our work. So that's a major concern. Also, we also think about, you know, the learners' well-being. A lot of the learners we know, their sleep patterns have changed. So therefore, that, you know, that the whole lifestyle structure has changed. And one of my concerns is after COVID, you know, we're expecting learners, you know, from primary school, you know, to university, to just go, you know, fit back into that structure of learning after suffering the trauma of going through the process of what we're going through with COVID.
Yes, exactly.
You know, and you know, I think of the effects that it has on us as adults, and you know, let's think about the young people, you know, about their sleep patterns, about the eating healthy. And whilst they're going through that, you know, we're bombarding them with, you know, we've got to get this work done. And it can be overwhelming. So there's a few things that I just want to sort of say to young people, to parents, to guardians. Try to keep the structure similar to what they had when they were in education. So, for example, I say to my learners, you know, you're in 2 days of the week. So those 2 days, keep them as days of learning. Yeah.
Okay.
Try to have your sleep pattern so you are awake, ready for 9 o'clock to do your work, ready to engage, because one of the things that they may not realize is that by engaging, we're marking a register and it's attendance. Attendance is also possibly going to contribute to what grades we're going to get. So that's also important. Yeah.
Sorry to cut you there, but we need to move on. But that key point you're talking about, predicted grades, that is something where the research has shown that Black students tend to get under predicted grades. So this is stopping people moving on into destinations of higher learning. Okay, could I call on Julian? Thank you, Judith. Could I call on Julian now, please? Thank you. Julian, the Ultrapreneur.
Hi, Patricia. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, so I guess it's interesting for me to lend my perspective as an entrepreneur in education, because the two haven't coexisted happily probably for some time now. And I know that the business community gets frustrated with education and vice versa. And what we've tried to do is to bring the two together and actually espouse the benefits of each. And actually, when I was a child, and I never really understood the benefit of education until I had an early intervention with entrepreneurship, and I realized why education was important, because I could apply it to something which was relevant. And Lord Young, he published a report in 2014 called Enterprise for All. And in there, he coined the 4th R. So we had reading, writing, arithmetic, and then relevance. And in that, he said that enterprise can help to make core academics relevant, so that it heightens the engagement of the learning, and it helps the learning to be transferable into life, into employability, and therefore increase the level of achievement and attainment in young people. Now, post that report, as with most reports, it's been left to organizations of various types, for-profit organizations, not-for-profit organizations, to often implement some of this thinking. And so for the last 5 years, we've been doing an extremely deep dive on the impact that entrepreneurial education has in young people. And one of the overriding responses that we get from parents around what benefit has ultra education and entrepreneurial education had on your child, and they've said that it's helped to build their confidence. And I think at a baseline, anyone who, whether you're in education, whether you're in business, there's a lot you can do with confidence, right? Because you can have all of the skills, you can have all of the academic excellence in life, but if you don't have the confidence to apply it, or the confidence to go into something that you really enjoy doing, as opposed to doing a job of work that you really hate, then you're not actually that productive. And I'm saying that to say that there's actually a productivity lag in the UK. And that's because there isn't enough innovation happening. And I don't think there's enough innovation happening because people are just in this kind of 9-to-5 grind, this kind of lemmings effect that we have. And that hasn't changed much, right? That's pretty much been the same in terms of how we've operated on our day-to-day lives. And I think that the introduction of, and I think it was Greg who said earlier on, that there is a minimal standard of education which is being delivered to our young people. And we want to deliver an ultra education. It's not just in the name, it's what we want to purvey to others. And that's not just working in a silo. You know, I'm in conversation with Courtney, we're working with Manhood Academy, we're working with UK Black Tech and a number of other organizations to effectively deliver on this ideal that we're all familiar with, that it takes a village to raise a child, but we have often been guilty of not working together in the most collaborative way possible. That is changing slowly, but I think that what the pandemic has shown is that our ability to respond to the needs has tested everybody. And some organizations have managed to respond really quickly, like Father to Father. Some organizations haven't. Some organizations have, you know, seen that their way of responding is to write reports, which informs other organizations about what to do. But if those things aren't connected in a meaningful way, then how effective are they actually for the young people that we're all trying to serve? So I think forums like this are great to help bring the discussion into one place, and then perhaps to provide some actionable steps that we can use to take forward in each one of our practices. But I think that one of the things that we always, and the narrative that we're reinforcing with entrepreneurs now, with our young entrepreneurs, is what problem are you solving? And if as an entrepreneur you're not solving a problem, then you don't have a business. And now in lockdown, it even more so, because when people rang me up and said, "Oh, Julian, everyone's pivoting their businesses, what should I do?" I said, solve a burning problem for somebody, not a problem that they can live with, not a problem that is a little bit of an annoyance, but solve a problem that keeps them awake at night. Solve a burning problem, something that they will pay to get rid of. And so that causes you to be really introspective and think to yourself, okay, what skills do I have? What knowledge, experience do I have that can now benefit others? And I think this is now dialed up what entrepreneurship is all about. And it's about helping, it's about impacting, and it's about solving meaningful problems for people in real situations. And again, another thing that this has highlighted is the impact that it's had on everyone's mental health. And I guess this idea of this growth mindset that I know has been in education for a long time, but actually there was a school I went into a few years ago and they had all these posters up which talked about growth mindset. And I asked the teacher, I said, are these up for show? And, you know, or are they actually being implemented? And the teacher was honest. They said, well, you know, there was a good intention behind it. We put them up with the intention of doing something, but we're not experts in growth mindset. So we didn't really know what to do. We didn't really know how to embed that into our curriculum. So we took that on board, and I realized that entrepreneurship isn't just a standalone subject, that it can be used, as Lord Young said in that report, to make other areas of the curriculum relevant. So, I mean, just this year alone, we've trained over 100 teachers on how they can introduce the theme of entrepreneurship into their curriculums so that they can dial up the areas of it which make it actionable for young people. It makes it more explicit to the student where that skill can then help them in employment, or help them when they're writing their their letter to get into university, or that job application, or what they're going to put on their LinkedIn profile. It's about how do you make these things actionable. And I think that if we can start to connect more deliberately what's happening in education and what's happening in enterprise and in the world of work, because there is still this massive disconnect between what education outputs and what industry requires. And so this disconnect has now brought on a new markets of outsourcing platforms. There are all these platforms now where entrepreneurs will outsource outside of the UK when we actually have the talent within, but I don't think we're utilizing them well enough.
Okay. Sorry, I was carried away with you talking, Julian, as usual. You know, you brought a new perspective, and I think it's really important. In our last 10 minutes, I've had some questions and comments that have been coming up from people watching and they all, apart from saying congratulations, fantastic, but you know that, you know, you're all very good. There's some questions asked about, again, joining up the dots, collective action in relation to many of the issues that we're talking. I mean, racism, personally, I think if we're just going to fight racism alone, it will kill us. And I don't say that lightly, because I feel like it's a distraction from the things that we want to get on with. We want to teach, we want to learn, we want to get on with raising our children, we want to get a job, or we want to create a business. But in order, what this whole pandemic has shown, and the inequalities, is that we cannot do this alone, and therefore we need to do things together. So I would like to ask, in terms of any of our speakers, perhaps from this group here, about collective action. You know, the survey is going to show a lot of information there, and we're using this as evidence. Evidence to not only inform policymakers, but to inform our actions. We've had, for instance, our first set of speakers, Ornette, was talking about the national infrastructure to have a platform for all these alternatives, that what the new normal is showing, that we're asking for something different. So a national infrastructure for the new alternatives. Julian is talking about the disconnect, that education wasn't very good at supplying for industry. What can therefore be the connection, and about solving burning problems. And the question of relevance has always been one as educators throughout since time. But I think particularly with business, relevance is very key. And, so for instance, has anybody want to come up about what can be done to do this collective action to deal with some of the issues that have been raised here today?
Could I just wanted to pick up on Julian's ideas, really, because I think that as an educationalist, we can think in terms of building an alternative education that is more structured around our personal development as a diaspora, our cultural heritage and racial and social justice. But let me tell you this, that sort of criticality in our education system for most of our young people actually doesn't work in the system. Employers actually aren't interested in Black criticality. They're not interested in Black people who have this sort of social awareness and consciousness and have this awareness of the theoretical injustices. So for me, we actually need to build a sort of economic ecosystem or infrastructure whereby when we educate our young people in our cultures and our ways of being, they have jobs to go to. There's no point really sort of giving them sort of African history and pride and navigating the system and this elevated.
Unless they go back to Africa.
Yeah. But if they're staying in this country, the system will not want that type of educated Black person, talking from bitter experience. So we need the jobs to kind of send our children or young people to.
Diane, sorry, Ornette, thank you very much. Diane, did you want to respond about building the movement, what this post-COVID is showing us?
Well, I think post-COVID, like with a lot of things, has shown up in a harsher light things we all knew. On the one hand, there's a good side, and I've been interested to hear from speakers this evening about how parents are having to engage with their children's education in a way perhaps they didn't before. There's sometimes a tendency with ordinary parents to think education is something that school does. And I think what COVID and lockdown has shown is it's as much something that they do, and that's good.
That is good.
But the inequalities which COVID has shown, the inequality between a child, on a council estate in Hackney, in a 2-bedroom flat, and there's 4 or 5 of them, and they've got no broadband. The inequality between someone like that and some of my, gentrified owner-occupiers, there's a tremendous owner-occupiers. One of the things about Hackney, which has always struck me, is you get these, it's in 20 years, it's got even more gentrified. And they'll say, our Sophie, she's doing so well, it's so wonderful. But they don't see that sometimes their child's advance is at the expense of other children that get marginalised or excluded. So I think we have to look on the positive side, greater parental engagement because of lockdown. But we have to look at bringing people together.
Yeah, exactly. Last word, perhaps from Paulette. You wanted to say something? Yeah.
So much agreement with the panelists here today, but I think yes, there's a realism that we have to have that schools aren't going to do it for us. Schools serve a very small slither of life for children, and it's an important one because we know in terms of work and qualifications it serves that purpose. And I think as parents we've got to realize that's the job of education for us. That's what we can take away from it. We're not going to get culture, we're not going to get our own history unless you've got dedicated head teachers. I know I was a head for 10 years before I moved on to my present job, and certainly the national curriculum allows 20% of the school's choice. And I know I made it my choice for my children to make sure Black history ran through top to bottom of the school. So it can be done, and it can be done in pockets. And certainly I know with my other Black head teachers in Birmingham, we're a tight group and we make sure things happen. But of course, pretty much it's only within our schools. But what we did do was just really try and just eke out as much and share as much knowledge with parents and the community.
Thank you, Paula. Thank you. I'd like to end now because I'd like to just wrap up because we want to end on time. I'd like to thank each and every one of the speakers for being here this evening. I'd like to thank all the viewers who've been viewing and participating. There's lots of questions that we haven't addressed, like the impact of lockdown on foster children, foster carers. Also, and I think it's very key, I've always known, I've been a head teacher in different continents, and I've always said, it is the parents who are the first teachers. And if they don't have it straight, that is it. So if there's anything that should come up from us, we must take back our responsibility. This deep dive should make us show what has been missing, and we must also take steps to fill that and find collective means economically, politically, socially, to support each other to make that happen. Therefore, I'd just like to say also that the survey, that's why, I'd like to thank Viv Armoon, who's also the co-director of Aspire Education, who has brought it to my attention in no uncertain terms that it is really this survey, the voice of the parents, of the teachers, of the carers, and that out of that some kind of organizational platform can actually be built, which can hold the new normal and everybody to account. Because what we've been atomized in our individual lockdown situations. And this is where a lot of rights can be trampled upon, and it's only by us coming together. And one of the things that many of the children have said to us as well, we run our Aspire Prep boot camps online, educating children in English, maths and science, online and coding. They've been saying a greater sense of community. They have been learning new things. And again, the sense of family. And so we want that to continue. And that's why we've brought you all together. And I'd like to thank His Excellency Seth George Ramakan and his wife, Dr. Lola Ramakan, Mega Nalatuya, who is here from Uganda, who gave us a moving testimony of what it's like for post-COVID education in Uganda, amongst rural Uganda. And I'd like to thank Gregory Logan, who I can't see on the screen right now, but all of us here together. And please, please, if you've seen this, this will be televised and you can share the link. But more importantly, please share the survey link, which will be coming to you. And if you can take action to help this crucial survey get out to people up and down the country, so people cannot say, we do not know, we have not heard, please email us at info@aspireeducationgroup.com. So thank you very, very much. We're ending precisely at 8:30. So thank you and good night, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.